Hello and welcome to Eventuri. My name is Imran Arshad and I'm joined by my fellow co-founder Bilal Mahmood. How are you doing, Bilal?
I'm good, thanks.
So a lot of people have been asking us how Eventuri started and what our process is in terms of designing class-leading intakes. So today we're going to take you through our background, how Eventuri started and how we design and build the intakes. So Bilal, let's start with you. How did this journey start?
So we can trace the origins to 2013, but before then, bit of background. So I've always been into cars. I'm a petrol head through and through, just like Imran. I've owned a number of M-Power cars, just like Imran, and we've known each other for a while before the business even began. My background in terms of education is engineering. I did a degree in aeronautical engineering. I also studied a PhD in fluid dynamics. So I have a pretty good understanding of fluid dynamics, which then made me question the intakes on the market at the time while I was modifying my own car. I was never really happy with what was on the market, and I always felt I could do something slightly better. However, my designs couldn't come into reality up until 2013 when 3D printing came to the consumer market. I bought a printer for myself. I then printed the first prototype. I contacted Imran because I knew he owned Evolve Automotive, a tuning company, and I knew he could then do some tests for me and give me some results. So I sent that to him and I just waited for Imran to give me some results.
So Bilal sent me this very strange looking 3D printed object. I'd never seen it before. As he mentioned, I own a tuning company called Evolve, which I started in 2007, and we primarily specialize in M-Power cars. So I had an E60 M5 at the time, which was our project car. I'd never seen an intake work on any M car up to that point, so I was very skeptical when he sent me this design, but I knew it from a long time, so I said I'd give it a go. We put it on the car, we did some thorough dyno testing, and we managed to get 12 horsepower out of this intake. Now, I was still very skeptical, so I made sure I data logged the car and wanted to back up what the dyno was telling me, and the data logs did back up that the car was making more power. At that point, I contacted Bilal and I said, "You've got something really special here, and I think we need to do something with it and bring it to the market."
So obviously I was ecstatic with that announcement from Imran. I knew in theory it would work from my background, but in reality, anything can happen. So those results backed up what I was theorizing. And that housing now is our iconic Venturi housing, which is patented. We have 2 patents for that actual design. We then moved that forward into a business, and then basically, Imran, you can explain what we are now.
Yeah, so that was the basis of Eventuri. It's a collaboration between Bilal and myself, using Bilal's expertise in the engineering side of things and using my expertise in bringing the product to market. Now we have 40 plus intakes and we sell them all the way around the world, and I'm really pleased with what we've created, and we've even managed to visit Buckingham Palace because of this business, because we actually won the Queen's Award in 2019, and that was something I never would have imagined happen when we actually started on this journey.
We briefly mentioned our patented Venturi housing design. I'm now going to take you through that concept in a bit more detail. So in front of me we have our Venturi housing, a cross section of the assembly with the filter and the filter itself, which is custom made for this concept. Before I explain the advantages of this design and how it works, let's just look at how a conventional intake works with a cone filter. So this is a typical MAF tube or just an inlet tube to the engine, and a typical cone filter would be in this orientation. So you'd have a cone filter in this orientation connecting to a MAF tube or an inlet tube. The connection would be with a silicon reducer, typically a velocity stack between them. So the airflow would have to negotiate through the front of this filter, through a relatively short velocity stack, which is starting at a large diameter, to a smaller diameter in a short length to the inlet tube. So you'd have your flow going through the filter through a short velocity stack into that diameter. And the disadvantage here is you've got pretty much a restriction there, because your airflow is negotiating a very tight bend. No matter how big that velocity stack is, it's still a short distance. And then you've got your increase of drag to the engine. So what we did was we flipped this around. So now it's in this orientation, sitting inside a much bigger housing. And that's what this is. So now we've got the housing, which is connected directly to the tube, and it's coming down from a large diameter at the mouth of the filter to the smaller diameter in a much longer space. That is a smooth reduction in cross-sectional area, which invokes the Venturi effect, which is basically an acceleration of the flow as it progresses through that length. That has advantages in that you have a reduction in overall drag. The airflow remains nice and laminar as it comes through the filter from the mouth and to the inlet to the engine, which is advantageous both for turbocharged cars and normally aspirated cars. So this design is our patented Venturi concept and is used wherever we can in our intake systems. The patented Venturi housing is not the only thing that makes an intake an Eventuri intake. There are certain instances where we physically cannot use that system, for example, where there's not enough space. What makes an intake an Eventuri intake is our level of attention and level of detail that we go to throughout the whole process, from the CAD design, the analysis, the prototyping, through to the production. What makes an intake an Eventuri intake is our underlying motivation to provide the customer with the best possible product, to set a global benchmark, and to make a product which we personally would be proud to install into our own cars. So you've now heard from us in terms of why we started Eventuri. Now the question is, how do we do what we do? So the best way to illustrate that is to actually take you on a journey and show you the complete process in terms of how we design the intake, take you through the processes of that to how we make, assemble, and then ship out the door. So first thing is first, this is my development area, and this is where everything starts. Now, this is our GAT. Sometimes we buy our own cars for development, sometimes we borrow them from our partners. This is our own GAT for development. The first step in terms of developing an intake is to scan the engine bay. So to do that, we have a laser 3D scanner, which we use to scan the space around the engine. It's a highly accurate system, which gives us very reliable data. Once the 3D scanning is done, we import that scan data into my 3D modeling software. This then gives us a virtual space within to design with. That shows us very clearly and very accurately all the restrictions, all the ancillaries, and the datum points for us to begin the design process. Once the initial designs are done in the modeling software, we can then iterate the design using flow dynamics software to analyze the flow through the system. This allows us to optimize the flow rate by making adjustments where possible on the design. Once we're happy with that, we can then move that virtual model into the real world. As good as 3D modeling software is, there's nothing like seeing a design in your hands, in the real world, in where it's supposed to be. So in order to bring the virtual models into reality, we rapid prototype them in-house, mostly using 3D printers. That allows us to physically fit those 3D printed prototypes into the engine bay, which allows us to visualize how it looks in the engine bay, also make sure that the prototypes clear all the ancillaries that we need them to clear. Once we're happy with that, we've made changes where we need to, those printed prototypes can actually be used for performance testing. One of the things we do is flow bench testing, which allows us to measure the actual maximum flow rate through the system. Once that's done, we can then measure what the system does in the car itself. And to do that, we use a variety of methods, such as dyno testing to measure power output, data logging to measure parameters from the ECU. We also measure acceleration times, such as 100 to 200 kilometers per hour, 60 to 130 miles per hour. We also take the cars on quarter mile events to measure the acceleration over a quarter mile. We can also take the cars on top speed events to measure over a longer distance. All these data points and tests give us a rigorous method of analyzing the intake and making sure that we have designed the most optimum system possible. We can go back and iterate design where possible to maximize on those measurements where we can. Once we're completely happy with the results we've got, the next step is to move the prototype into carbon production.
You've seen our design and development process. Here is our production area where everything is hand assembled by our technicians. We only use 100% pre-preg carbon fibre, so no fiberglass and no overlay. We have lots of custom hardware like the bolts, the clamps and the silicons that are part of the intake kits. From here, everything is prepared to a really high level, carbon is polished up, and once the kits are assembled, they go through final quality control checks. From here, everything is moved over to our packing area where the goods are shipped to our distributors all across the world.
So once we've done our bit and shipped out the intakes through our distributors and dealers, they end up with the end user. And then it gives us great pleasure to see those intakes being fitted to those cars and the incredible feedback we get from the end users.
So I hope you really enjoyed this brief summary of our background, how we make the intakes and where they end up across the world. If you guys want any more information, you can go onto our website, eventuri.net. And if you want to follow me and Bilal individually on Instagram, we'll put our handles up here so you can see what we get up to behind the scenes.